So another important video I wanted to make that I think everybody can benefit from, myself included, is the concept of rehabilitating your body. It's rehab and also prehab, the idea of fixing a problem before it really occurs. Now, I could go into a lot of depth on this as far as personal experience, research, peer-reviewed, published studies, things like that, but I'm gonna try to keep this video as condensed as I can while also being informative. So I'm gonna skip past all the nitty-gritty and kind of break it down simple. When it comes to the most common types of pain that everybody feels in their day-to-day life, and this is people who don't work out, they have a pretty sedentary lifestyle, just due to the current world we live in, whether it's sitting at desk or just sitting down too often in general, not being physically active enough, or being very imbalanced on what kind of activities we do and then which activities we neglect and we don't do. And then they feel like if they do work out and they are already very, very active and they still have lower back pain and knee pain, they just learn to live with it. They kind of accept this false reality that, well, I guess I did too much damage when I was younger, or I did incorrect exercises. I've already busted up my body and I can't fix it. I am not exaggerating when I tell you that probably 95 to maybe even 98% of the time, I mean, the very vast majority of the time, you don't need surgery. You don't need medical intervention as far as medications, painkillers, anti-inflammatories, cortisol, steroids, things like that. What you need is to bring your muscles into balance. And let me explain. With your knee, with any joint, it needs to be controlled from two different directions. It's not a one-directional joint, it's a bidirectional joint. So just like your elbow needs to be able to extend forward, it also needs to be able to curl in. And that's why we have the tricep to pull and extend the arm, and we have the bicep to pull and bend the arm. It goes in both directions. And the leg is no different. You have quadriceps and you have hamstrings to control both directions of the knee. Same with the hips, except the hips are much more complex. Same with the shoulders. Again, very, very complex, similar to the hips. But one thing that happens a lot is people will overtrain one muscle completely unintentionally. Unknowingly, they are overtraining one muscle. And I don't mean overtrain as in this kind of generic concept of overtraining, stop training. What I mean is it's overtrained in comparison to the other muscle. It's too disproportionately trained. So what happens is a lot of these athletes, for example, they would do a lot of squat. Squat builds up the quads. We know that. Actually, it builds a lot of the muscles of the lower body and even of the back, believe it or not. But what happens is a lot of these people who squat all the time, like if they're a powerlifter as an example, they focus so much on getting a better squat for competition that it's all they do. They build their whole routine around lots of squat, lots of bench press, lots of deadlift, because that's what they have to do in competition. But with all this squat, even though it's working lots of muscles of the lower legs, it's primarily working the glute and the quad. And depending on your squat technique, maybe if you have a high bar position, your knees go forward a little bit more, it's working a lot of the quads. And then they might even say, you know what, I need to supplement my squat, help it go up by after I get done doing all this squat, I'm gonna go over here, I'm gonna do leg extensions. So they work their quads even more. And what ends up happening very, very commonly, and this isn't just powerlifters, this is with everybody, is they end up getting overdeveloped quads and underdeveloped hamstrings. And this creates an imbalance in the knee joint itself. What ends up happening is you have constant, even resting tension on the front. Because when this muscle becomes big and strong, it naturally pulls harder. It's like having a bigger, thicker resistance band, right? It has more pulling force and more resistance to bending, even in a resting state, even when you're not flexing it. It just has more resting load on it, pulling against the knee in this direction. Meanwhile, not only is the hamstring not as big and not proportionate, but it's actually undersized. It's actually smaller than it should be because you haven't trained it enough or not trained it directly enough. And what happens is the hamstring is already weak on people who don't even work out most of the time, which is, again, a whole rabbit hole we can get into. But in this case, it's especially weak in comparison to the very overdeveloped quad. And basically what happens is you have relatively no tension, no tightness, trying to think of a good word here, but basically you have no resting resting tension on the hamstring, keeping the leg pulled back where it's supposed to be, compared to the quad pulling it this way. And what happens is it's not just the fact that it wants to straighten the leg even in a resting state. What actually ends up happening is in the joint itself, it starts to shift. It starts to shift the entire shin forward in the knee socket and starts to put pressure on one side of the joint, starts to pull things forward and out of alignment. And that's when you start having that knee pain all the time, even when you're not working out. You notice when you go upstairs, your knees kind of hurt. When you sit down and go to stand up, knees kind of hurt. When you're working out, your knees kind of hurt. It gets to the point where you just learn to live with the fact that your knees always hurt and you figure, I must have bad knees. And the unfortunate thing is that if you leave it this way and you never address that issue, eventually that misaligned joint will cause wear and tear that's very, very hard to correct. But you can correct it. And what I'm going to show you will help even if you've already had wear and tear. So the very first thing we're going to look at is bringing the leg back into balance. And the number one thing you can do is work the hamstrings. Now, because I know a lot of people, they are new to the total gym, or even if they're not new to the total gym, they have past injuries, maybe they're not very flexible, maybe 101 different reasons why some of the hamstring exercises on the total gym are especially difficult. They think, man, trying to get these cables hooked around my feet, trying to get up on the total gym, get my leg over each side, facing the tower, get it hooked over my foot, trying to pull and not fall off. The whole thing becomes very cumbersome and kind of dangerous, actually. So I'm actually going to show you how to work the hamstrings on this total gym without using the cables. And as a matter of fact, one of the problems with using the wing attachment in the traditional lying, like leg pull sort of configuration is, again, your body follows the path of least resistance. It doesn't know what muscles you're trying to work. It just knows about moving the load from point A to point B. So a lot of people, they think they have very weak abs, but in fact their abs are usually overdeveloped, which is another thing we'll get into. But their hip flexors are very, very strong. And even not only are they strong, but they're naturally very, very tight. Again, from our lifestyles of always sitting, they're kind of naturally shortened and naturally tight, and they naturally want to pull the leg up. So when you put this wing attachment up here at the top of your total gym and you lay on it and you hook your feet in, you're trying to curl your body up, rather than using a lot of your hamstrings to curl your body up, what usually ends up happening is you use a lot of your lower abs and your hip flexors because your body thinks of it more as a modified knee raise. It's actually trying to pull the knee up, trying to pull your legs towards your body using a lot of these hip flexors. So not only is this a very unnatural and kind of weird motion for the body because it's trying to pull the knees up while keeping the legs pinned back, the ankles pinned back, but it also can't effectively really curl the ankles for the hamstrings because the knees keep drifting forward as you go higher and higher and higher. So I'm going to show you a modified version of that. Now, for this, we are still going to have the handle facing down to the bottom of the total gym, but we're actually going to flip it upside down and we're going to bring it down here to the bottom side. Of course, we could detach our cable. That's usually what they say to do is, hey, remove the cable. But in this case, for safety reasons, and especially for people who might have balance issues or maybe some pain in their hips or the lower back and it's harder to do this, we're actually going to keep the cable attached, and I'll show you why. We're going to step over, and the idea is that we're going to be sitting not at the very edge of the pad, but we want our knees hanging over the front of the pad, like the same way it would when we're doing a seated leg curl at the gym. And these handles are going to be used to help pull us into position and to help us get on and off into the right position, on and off the machine into the right position. So when I sit back, I can't really get my feet in position. As a matter of fact, trying to stretch too much kind of puts pressure on my lower back. So I get myself scooted back here in the position I need, and then I'm going to pull just so I can lift my legs up and hook them in. Now, once I'm in position, get some tension on here, I'm not going to row with this anymore. These are going to be in my hand so I don't have to go find them later, but I'm not going to use my body to pull, not my upper body anyway. I'm going to do is kind of let my arms hang at the side, just kind of keep track of these. I don't want to drop them, but I'm actually going to use my hamstrings to curl. And the idea is thinking just like at the gym, I'm trying to curl my ankles towards my butt. Just like that. Now, I noticed that being up high at this level, it's a little too tough. I don't want to challenge myself that much. With a move like this, especially when we're doing a rehab move, we don't want to overload it. We don't want to do a lot of weight. In fact, because of the reason that I just mentioned before, the body always following the path of least resistance, if it's too heavy, you might be able to force your way through it, but most likely your body's going to start using the wrong muscles and start putting negative pressure on the joints, and we don't want that. We want to be able to keep a low impact, low pressure, and actually isolate and hit the muscle intentionally so we can properly rehabilitate our knee here. So I'm going to drop this down, let's say to level 3. You can switch this as much as you want, obviously. So don't worry that once you pick a level, you have to stay there. If it's a little too hard, there's no ego. This is about helping yourself, about fixing your body. There's no ego. So if you need to drop it again, just drop it again. And if it's too easy, raise it up a level. Now, once I'm set in position here, like I said, I'm not going to use my hands to pull at all. These are just kind of hanging here, just keeping track of the handles. I'm going to curl my ankles towards my butt. Now, as you can see, doing it in this position is much more natural. Not only can I keep my body upright and comfortable so it doesn't give me issues with vertigo, but my knees, they only move just as much as they need to complete the movement. My legs are going through a much more natural curling movement like this. And it's only putting pressure on the hamstrings. I'm not using my lower abs to try and lift my knees towards my body. I'm using my hamstrings to curl my body up. And of course, it's really easy to get your feet out. Getting in or getting out takes no sorts of acrobatic skills. You just put your feet in, curl, and when you're done, put tension on the handles, hold yourself in place, and hop right off. I prefer level 4. That's the perfect balance of low pressure on the joints and allowing me to actually still focus on the hamstrings, but giving my hamstrings enough resistance. But that's me. Obviously, these levels don't really mean anything across the board. A level 4 for me is not the same as a level 4 for you. If you are very strong, but you're very lightweight, lots of power, low body weight, you might be able to go all the way up to the top, and that's the level that you need. And don't think anything of it, saying, oh, I shouldn't go to the top. He said that's wrong. If that's what you need to activate the hamstrings properly, by all means, go to the top level. And if you need to go all the way down to like level 2 or something, go down to level 2. I would just advise maybe try not to go down to level 1 because your feet would probably hit the ground or there'd be some issues with the machine running into itself. Now, if you kind of are in between, if you say, well, I can do a few, maybe I can do 5 or 6, but then it starts to get hard. The great thing about this position, it also gives you the opportunity to do forced reps. And a forced rep obviously means that if you pull and it's starting to get hard, you need just a little bit of assistance. You don't want to give up the set, but you can't finish with good form. That's when you can use these handles. Pull just enough to give yourself a little bit of a forced rep. Pull with the handles just enough to keep yourself going while trying to keep the primary amount of load on your hamstrings. And if you want, you can even use a negative rep, which means that you can't do any more forced reps even with the upper body assistance. So instead what you do is you basically pull yourself into the top position with your upper body, lock your hamstrings in place, and then you let it loose and let your body drop down nice and slow, utilizing the negative release of that muscle. Now this is a hugely beneficial exercise. I cannot possibly overstate how unbelievably useful being able to do an isolated hamstring curl is to the health of your knees and actually your lower back. And that moves on to the next part. Lower back pain is like the #1 issue, I think, around the world, probably throughout human history. It has changed lives for the worse, and we all know it. I've had lower back pain. Everybody's had lower back pain. And some being quite severe. I've had very severe medical issues related to my lower back. But as long as I am training correctly, as long as I'm keeping my ego out of it and I'm remembering to do my proper rehab and prehab, I've not only been able to reverse Very, very debilitating lower back issues, but I've been able to actually prevent them from coming back as long as I'm being diligent about my rehab and prehab work. And that moves on to trying to fix the lower back. Now again, just like I've mentioned in several other videos, I'm not a big advocate of a lot of isolated ab exercises. People have this concept and this idea, this unfortunately, this kind of misplaced theory that their abs are weak. They've been told by media and everybody else, usually trying to sell an ab product, that their abs are weak, their abs are weak. You need to train your abs, work your abs. And they've even been told that having strong abs will relieve lower back pain. Unfortunately, that's just not true. Muscles do not push. Every single muscle pulls. There's no such thing as a muscle that pushes. You think, well, I can push out. That's because your triceps are pulling on the back of your elbow to straighten your arm out. Your pec is pulling the upper arm forward. Everything is pulling. And our abs, as we know, when it comes to our core, we have a spine right here. We have these bones in the back, but then on the sides, there are no bones. On the front, there are no bones. There's no actual structural bony support for anything in our core except this one narrow little section down our back. Everything else is supported by muscles, and the misconception is that the ab muscles are what keep your chest up. It's what keeps the ribs up. But that would require these muscles that are stretched from your ribs down to your hips. That means that they're basically pushing up like a shoulder press and they're lifting up. And that is just physiologically impossible. That's not how muscles work anywhere in the body. On any mammal that I know of, muscles do not push. The abs are meant for crunching. It's meant for pulling your chest down towards the hips. That's why when you want to train your abs, you always crunch your body. When you want to train the lower abs, again, you kind of crunch your lower body. You lift your legs up or you lift your hips up. It's always about bringing the front into a C shape, closing it together, because that's what tightens and strengthens the abs. That's what they do as their function. So becoming very, very good at crunching down and shortening the abs is not going to magically make them really, really good at expanding further than they can naturally and pushing your body back up into position. It's just not how it works. It's an unfortunate misconception that's very easy to understand. It's very easy to debunk this old myth if you think about it physiologically for a few seconds, but most people don't think about it. They just hear, oh, train abs, good for my lower back. And they're kind of adding fuel to the fire. In fact, it's all these muscles back here. These muscles back here of your lower back and your hips and your glutes, those are the ones that keep you upright. The same way that your upper back muscles, when they're nice and tight and they're trained and they're developed, they pull your shoulders back and they pull things into alignment, relieve shoulder pressure. When these muscles in your posterior chain, your hamstrings, your glutes, your lower back, when these are developed and these are tight and these are doing their job, they keep firm and they keep tight and they keep you pulled up into a good position. They keep your hip in a good position, they keep your legs in good positions, they keep your shoulders up, they keep your ribs up, they keep everything up right where it's supposed to be. And a lot of people, unfortunately, they train their abs like crazy, even though typically that makes things worse. Because again, we sit all day at desks, you know, we have these jobs where we sit at a desk and we work on the computer. And as we all know, we've always seen the infographics, we've seen the illustrations, the shoulders rolled forward, the body's hunched forward, and this is the position we're in for 8-10 hours a day. And then sometimes we go home, we sit on the couch, we watch TV, and we're kind of in this same position again. And what happens is the muscles start to kind of atrophy and they shorten into this position. The shoulder is forward so often that these muscles start to shorten and want to permanently pull the shoulder forward. The abs and the hip flexors are in this shortened position so much that they start to atrophy and naturally want to stay in that shortened position. And that's why when we sit down, back doesn't really hurt. But as soon as we try to stand up, oh, we feel this back pain. That's because these ab muscles and these hip flexors are trying to stay short and they're putting pressure on that lower back. The way we fix that is not with more ab work. It just makes those short little muscles even stronger and even shorter. We don't want that. We need to bring things back into alignment by working the glutes, the hamstrings, and the lower back, working our posterior chain. I cannot tell you how unbelievably beneficial, not just for me, but for tens, hundreds of millions of people throughout the years, it has been to work the posterior chain. Every single time I've ever known anybody, even people that have actual medical issues, they've broken their back, they have slipped discs, they have herniations, myself included. I've had slipped disc, I've had rotated spine, shifted hips, multiple herniations. I mean, I've banged myself up over the years and gotten to the point where I spent most of a year almost not being able to walk. I had to stay in a chair for about 22 hours a day. And I was able to fix my issues with no surgeries by simply bringing things back into alignment, by pushing through the pain and forcing myself to work those muscles and bring things back into alignment. So that's what we're gonna do now. I'm gonna show you how to properly train the posterior chain. But unlike some of my other videos, we're giving it a peace of mind of rehab and prehab. So I'm going into this thinking that you might have lower back pain right now. Your hips, your lower back might hurt right this second. You might not be able to bend over very far because you have that shooting sciatica. You might not be able to keep your legs straight and lift it in front of you because it catches your lower back and it hurts. So trying to do these, again, weird acrobatic movements or these more specialized movements, it's just physically not possible. You end up not being able to do it, and when you even try, you hurt yourself worse. So I'm gonna show you how to do all the posterior chain muscles without hurting yourself, with already having back pain in mind, with having back issues in mind. We're gonna do it in a safe, low impact, and effective way to help bring those things back into alignment. Now, the very first thing we should do are these curls I just showed you. Part of the posterior chain are the hamstrings. It's a very big part of the hamstrings, as a matter of fact. And with these hip flexors being so short, it's always trying to pull your leg up. And what ends up happening is it puts a lot of downward pressure on the back of your hips and it tilts them this way, and it creates a lot of this lower back pain, this separation here, which wants discs to herniate out through that big spaced opening. So what we're trying to do is tighten these hamstrings to help pull them back in line before we then tighten the back muscles and the glute muscles to help pull the hips back in line. But first it starts with the hamstrings. Now, again, I cannot overstate how important these seated hamstring curls are. Doing it this way will not only target your hamstrings fantastically, but you can get into this position even with massive back pain, even with problems with your legs, sciatic issues, this and that. Being able to have the safety catches and having the handles to pull yourself into place, being able to give yourself a forced rep, being able to stay in an upright, comfortable position and curl in a natural movement pattern is gonna make it so you can very, very, very effectively hit those hamstrings without irritating back issues, without making things worse. Now, after we have done a few sets of hamstring curls, these seated hamstring curls I just showed you, we're gonna do hyperextensions, but this is a modified hyperextension. One of the problems with trying to do traditional good mornings or hyperextensions is that it involves your leg being straight and locked out. And then with your legs straight and locked out, you're trying to bend over. And of course, if you already have lower back issues, things are already inflamed, there's already nerve irritation and inflammation, sciatica. As soon as you start trying to bend over with stiff legs, you feel that lower back catch, and it's a killer. You can't do it. So we're doing a modified form. We're going to keep pressure off of the lower back while still being able to activate and train those muscles. Now, again, start at a level you feel comfortable with. I would advise not going all the way to the bottom, because if you go all the way down to level 2 or 3, it's going to be so little resistance that you're not going to be able to properly activate the muscles. So you do need some level of resistance, but you don't have to go all the way to the top. Let me take my wing attachment off here, set it aside. Now, unlike the other videos where my legs are straight and I'm basically doing toe touches when I bend over, this time I'm keeping pressure off the lower back. I don't want to overstretch and irritate already irritated, already inflamed, already aggravated nerves and muscles. So I'm going to put my feet here at the bottom. I'm going to sit down on my ankles with my body upright like this. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to lean all the way forward, almost like I'm trying to kiss my glide board. And as I lean all the way forward, I'm trying to keep my butt down. I'm not leaning forward like this, because then my lower back muscles are not stretching at all. They're not expanding at all. So I'm going to try to keep my butt down. I'm also going to try to keep my chest up and my shoulders back so my spine is in a good position. And then I'm going to lower myself down with my back staying straight. as far forward as I possibly can, like I'm trying to lay my stomach down against my upper thighs. Then, keeping my butt down, I straighten up. Now I'm not going to lean all the way back and fall backwards. I'm coming just upright. I'm going to come down nice and slow and controlled, keeping my back nice and straight. Sit up. Come down. Sit up. Down. Up. Down. Up. And as you go through this motion, you'll be able to find your own little groove. But again, it's very important that you don't start going too fast. You don't start slinging around. You don't accidentally become complacent and end up rounding your back as you're going down, because you might acerbate things. So, as I'm doing this, I can feel, the first few reps I didn't really feel it. I thought, I don't know if this is working correctly. But as I keep going nice and controlled like this, and being very strict about my form, I'm starting to feel it in my lower back and a little bit in my glute minor. Now, the glute minor is the smaller portion of your glute, near the top and the outside. Now this, again, is good for the lower back primarily. It not only reinforces good structural form because you're forcing your back to stay straight even while bending down, but it also allows your back to stay straight, that good structural form, while extending the low back muscles and then contracting them, but without having that overly straight, overexertion, overstretch, sciatic pain, irritation of trying to do everything with your knees locked or basically straight as you go down. And the next part of that, as I just mentioned, is the glute minor. It's kind of these outside leg muscles tied into the smaller part of your glute, which helps control your leg coming out away from your body. But it's all tied in to these outer and back hip muscles, these muscles that kind of sling across here. So we're going to do a modified version of the hip abductor. Instead of sitting on the glide board and grabbing the handles and hooking our feet and trying to pull outward, which is kind of a very awkward movement, again, it's a bit acrobatic, what we're going to do is we're going to take the glide board, we're going to put it all the way at the top. And there's a reason for this. We want to stimulate a very specific angle here. Now, a lot of muscle load comes from the direction. The direction that a muscle has the load being placed on it will affect which portion of that muscle or which portion of the range of motion is actually being worked. So we need to try to make the best of both worlds. When it comes to this muscle, the glute minor, these abductor muscles here, if we're laying flat on the ground and we're coming up, what happens is we have a lot of resistance right here at the very bottom because that's where it's closest to being parallel with the ground. But as we go higher and higher, there's really less and less resistance as our leg becomes more and more perpendicular to the ground. And if we try to stand up like this and do it in this position, it's kind of the opposite problem. Right here is not much resistance at all. It's just kind of swinging the leg back and forth. We don't really start to catch and feel resistance until it starts to get out to here. But then by that point, it starts to feel a bit awkward. We feel like we don't know if we can lift it any higher, if it's really going to catch. Maybe we're going to bend over, kind of fall, lose our balance, switch muscles. So we need a nice, stable, safe way to keep the spine neutral, to keep the spinal column and the hips unloaded. We're not going to stand up and squirm and move and risk slipping something, but we need to have the load appropriate all throughout the range of motion. It needs to have load feeling it in the bottom and then all the way to the top. And the way we're going to do that is split the difference. We want our body to be very close to being at a 45-degree angle. And we can't quite get there with this, but it's very close. So what we're going to do is just get here, sit on the machine as carefully as you can. I like to hook my arm over the top of the machine. I don't have to hang on to anything. It's very, very stable. I put my arm right over the top and it naturally keeps me in place. I don't have to think about it. My arm just sitting on the top keeps me in position. And then from here, I bring an arm across. I touch the glide board just to stabilize myself. And that's when I start to keep my leg straight. You can have a little bit of bend if you want, but don't have it at a 45-degree angle. And then you come up. And the important thing is to keep pressure with a bit of a partial range of motion. You're not going up so high that it's starting to impinge things. Once you're parallel to the ground, that's pretty good. And when you come down, you don't want to rest. Right before you come down into a resting position, you want to stop so you're still working the muscle just to keep it in that lower position. You're keeping tension the whole time. It's a constant tension type of motion. as I go through. And I do all these nice and slow, nice and controlled. Now what you want to avoid is, again, you start to bend your leg. Not only does it remove load, but it also brings the leg forward, and it doesn't quite hit the muscle the same way. It starts to shift the emphasis. Not only that, but you also might find yourself leaning back. And aside from the fact that you might tip your gym over, is you start to use those hip flexors. Your body starts to try to trick you into very slowly rolling over onto your back, so you can use those hip flexors to basically do a modified leg lift, because that's where it's powerful. That's the path of least resistance. It's gonna very slowly start to have you shift. You don't even realize you're doing it, which again comes into hanging on to this, making sure that you can't accidentally drift back because you're hooked in, and you keep it right there. And if you do need to lean in some direction, if you don't find it very easy to stay directly on your side, then I'd suggest leaning forward a little bit, because that'll just put more emphasis on your glutes, just like that. And even with the first few reps with no weight attached, I guarantee you're gonna feel it. Now, after you've done both sides, what I would do actually is I would flip back over, and I'd come back over, and I would actually drop the total gym down. I'd put my wing attachment back on. I'd do more of those leg curls. As a matter of fact, what I would suggest is you start with the leg curls. The hamstrings are such a crucial part of this equation. Again, I cannot oversell them, that I would start with the hamstring curls, and then once you're becoming pretty pumped up, feel like you can't do anymore, not to absolute failure, but they're really burning, move on. After that, you would do your modified hyperextensions. Maybe do leg curls again after that. Then you go to your hip abductors, then go back to your leg curls. I would use leg curls in between every other exercise, because that's how important it is to get these hamstrings nice and tight. But I digress. We'll move on to the next thing. Now, we've worked the hamstrings, we've worked a bit of the lower back and glute minor. Now we've done hip abductors to work all these abduction muscles. Now we're going to move on to modified kickbacks. Now, this isn't a big modification. Again, this is primarily focused on a little bit of your body angle when doing them, but the primary thing is stability. We're trying to make sure that through this range of motion, you can remain as stable and firm as possible. So I'm going to grab my wing attachment here. And again, I'm going to keep my gym in the top position. This is where it's going to give me the kind of angle that I want to keep my body as effective and safe as possible. I put my left leg right here, the knee right in the middle of the glide board, hang on to these handles. And then from here, you can keep a slight bend in your knee. You don't have to lock it straight. I do my normal kickbacks. Now, the thing I would suggest is that don't go straight back. Come at a slight angle. When you're doing this, you don't want to come straight back behind you, and you don't want to come out here to the side. I would say come at like a 45, maybe a 35-degree angle, thinking about cutting a little bit away from this total gym. And if for some reason, because of the way that your muscles are balanced, that seems either a little too difficult or a little too easy, that's when you can start getting these slight tweaks. Then you can try and say, okay, well, maybe I'll bring it out more. Maybe that works better for you. But ideally, you can bring it relatively straight back. And that's gonna, again, activate those glutes. And I guarantee, even with no cables attached, with no weights, with these other movements done first is a little bit of a pre-exhaust, and then getting in that very specific positioning and keeping it so that only your glute can work. Your back is not bending, your shoulders aren't going forward and back, nothing else is moving except for that one leg. That one femur is pivoting in the socket, and it's only being able to do that because of the glute firing. You're going to feel it burn. I guarantee it. You're gonna feel it, I promise you. Now, after we've done those, a bit of a modified version of the kickbacks, we're going to do glute bridges. Now, this seems like a pretty simple concept. Glute bridges, in theory, are very, very simple, and they're very easy to do. However, I like to put a slight twist on it. I don't want to lay on the ground when I do my bridges because, again, the angle it puts my body at means that in the top position, my head is way lower than my hips. Everything's basically shifting towards my shoulders, which means the primary amount of resistance or the load is actually just being shifted forward onto my shoulders. My glutes don't have to do as much work. However, if we go in the opposite direction and we're basically leaned back just a little bit, we try to do the bridges, well, there's really nothing for your glutes to have to lift against. There's really no weight to move. So I like to do them on the glide board, and I do it this way specifically. I put my Pilates bar on here, and if you don't have the Pilates bar, you could try using your squat platform, but you'd probably have to change the angle a little bit to kind of get things lined up properly. I bring my butt all the way down, keep my back nice and straight. Now I lean back, now I'm safely leaned back. There should be no issues, I'm not feeling any pain. Bring my legs up. Now before I start doing this, I'm gonna take you step by step through what I'm gonna do. What I'm gonna do here in theory is I'm gonna put my midfoot right over the edge of the Pilates bar. I'm gonna bring it out. I don't want my feet together, I want them out towards the edge. Now, for obvious reasons, don't go too far out because your feet will slide right off and might hurt yourself. But try to get your feet shoulder width, and if possible, maybe a little bit further than shoulder width. Guys, it kind of depends on how wide your shoulders are. But shoulder width is usually a pretty good indication of your hip width. And that's the idea, is you want your feet at least as wide as your hips, if not a little bit wider. Now, when I push kind of like a squat, it brings my legs up into this 90-degree angle, and that's what I want. I don't want my legs to be bending or straightening during this movement. I want my legs to be kind of locked in to this bent angle, and then I'm just lifting my hips up. Now I know that you think, well, why do you need the glide board for that? It's not so much that the glide board adds a special resistance, it's that it maintains a very specific angle. You'll notice that when I come to the top, my hips are relatively lined up with my shoulders. There's no shifting of the weight one direction or another. It also means that as I go through this motion and my legs change angles, if my body needs to shift a little bit, which it does, you'll see the glide board moves about 1 or 2 inches up and down as I go through this range of motion. Very strict, very carefully. And being able to shift up and down means that my body can do what it needs to do. It can shift the shoulders up and then bring them down, then shift them up and then bring them down in order to keep the load on my actual glutes. If you don't have that little shift, if you don't have that little movement, what ends up happening is instead of keeping the load focused on the glutes the whole time, it'll very slowly transfer to a different muscle. If your shoulders can't slide back and your feet can't slide out, what happens is that your knees end up going forward and you end up using a little bit of your quads to kind of extend your legs up, or use a little bit of your hamstrings to pull your hips forward towards your feet, depending on what part of the motion that you're in. And we don't want that at all. We do not want any of this load shifting onto the leg muscles. Our leg muscles, our quads and our hamstrings are only working just enough that we can keep our leg in that fixed position as we then go through and drive the hips forward. And a lot of this has to do with the mind-muscle connection. I know this sounds a little funny, a little vulgar. I think I've said it in an old video before, but the lingo that we always used back when I was a competitive powerlifter and we were doing deadlift, a lot of guys had trouble with deadlift. They were always thinking about pulling the bar up, trying to pull the bar up, and that's when they start rounding their back. They're activating the wrong muscles, they get some injuries. And what we found was the best way to have that mind-muscle connection and the best way to think about the movement that would keep you in a safe position and also activate the muscles correctly is if we would tell all the other guys, work your sex muscles. The idea is that you're driving your hips forward. You're shooting your hips forward. You're not thinking about pulling the bar up with the deadlift. The idea is that you're pushing your hips back behind you, and then at a certain point when it's time to come up, you drive your hips forward. As you drive your hips forward, these nice strong hip muscles, these glutes, as they drive forward, it naturally separates the shoulders from the feet and it naturally pulls the bar up. But that's how you use the powerful hip muscles in a deadlift and maximize the amount of weight you can pull. And that's why one of the best methods to increase your deadlift without deadlifting is to do hip thrusters or glute bridges. So where you put a barbell or something across your hips and you do that, you do a bridge with a barbell across it. We call it hip thrusters because it's using those same hip muscles to drive the hips forward with weight on top of them. Well, this is basically a modified version of that. We're not trying to bend or straighten the legs. We're not trying to round or straighten the back. We want the back as straight as possible, so it's flat against the glide board. We want the legs in one fixed position, so they're hooked into their L shape right here on the bar. We want them to be able to move in a natural little pivot motion 2 inches back and forth as our hips go through its range of motion. All we're thinking about is driving the hips forward. As I'm doing this, I'm not thinking about pushing my feet down. I'm not thinking about sliding myself up the glide board like a squat. I'm thinking specifically about driving my hips forward. And if I just close my eyes and think about driving my hips forward, then naturally what happens as a byproduct of that. Now, if I have my eyes closed right now and I think, okay, I need to make sure this glide board goes 2 inches up. I'm going to think about the glide board going 2 inches up. I end up kind of straightening my legs and squatting a bit. I don't want that. If I think about pushing my feet down towards the ground, again, I kind of end up squatting the weight. I don't want that. I want my back to be flat, legs to be bent, and all I'm thinking about is taking my hips, just my hips, nothing else, just these hip muscles, and driving them forward towards the ceiling. And as I think about that, suddenly everything is working perfectly. The glide board will move just as much as it needs to. Everything else will take care of itself. And I can already feel my glutes starting to burn. So, work your sex muscles. Anyway, again, I cannot emphasize enough. Need to work the hamstrings, need to work the glutes, we need to work the lower back, that posterior chain. It's going to help with your knee issues, it's going to help with your lower back issues. It will massively improve your quality of life. It will improve your posture. It will improve your lifts. You'll be amazed at how much more weight you can lift and how much more effortlessly you can go through certain motions and movements, whether in the gym or in your daily life, just because your posterior chain is finally strong. And not only is it strong, but being strong means that your bones are lined up. And when everything in your skeletal system is lined up, it doesn't just mean that you have stronger muscles here, which it strengthens the whole chain, right? You want every link in the chain to be strong, but it means that the really strong muscles that you've been working for years in the front, the quads, the pecs, the front delts, now they have a nice stable platform to work off of and they can work even more effectively. So anyway, this video has gone on long enough. This was not really a follow me video, more of an explanation video, because low back pain and knee pain, but especially low back pain, has wrecked my life, and I was able to fix it multiple times through multiple injuries by being very persistent with working the muscles correctly, bringing things back into alignment, doing my rehab movements. And again, I cannot stress that enough. I've had people I've trained personally avoid surgeries by training properly, by doing these rehab movements. I was going to many different specialists, having decompression tables every single day. I had painkillers, this and that. They were talking about surgeries, and eventually I said, what am I doing? I always fixed this stuff myself in the past. I always fixed it in the gym, not on an operating table. Screw these doctors. I'm gonna go back, I'm gonna try this one more time. What's the worst that can happen? If these workouts don't work, I can have that surgery they were talking about. And lo and behold, no back pain. I'm back to my old self again. I feel good and I feel strong. Just because your low back hurts, or just because your knees hurt, just because you have joint pain, even if it's been there for years and nothing seems to fix it, it doesn't mean you're doomed to a lifetime of pain, and it doesn't mean that you have to save up for an expensive surgery. Try doing this. I promise, even if you don't know you have issues, even if you're so used to the dull aches and pains that you don't even notice them anymore, start doing this and I promise you, you're gonna see a difference. Anyway, that's enough. I gotta stop talking. I'm gonna go downstairs, get on with my day, get my workout in, and other than that, I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.